You don't belong here. That's what he said to me right in front of his friends. On the balcony I had scrubbed. In the house I helped pay bills for. I didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't even blink. I just walked back inside, folded my clothes in silence, and left within 20 minutes. What he didn't know was that his parents still owed the bank, and I had just bought their mortgage. 3 months later, they opened the door and saw me. No yelling, no revenge speech, just a smile and 4 words. Hi, I'm your landlord. My name is Emily Wade, and I used to think love meant sacrifice. At least, that's what I told myself every time I stayed quiet, every time I folded his laundry, covered his rent, and smiled through the silence. I met Tyler Morgan at a farmer's market in downtown Boulder, Colorado. He wore thrifted jackets, used the word intentional a lot, and drank coffee like it was a personality trait. I was the bookish one, worked full-time at the university library, kept to myself, read poetry on lunch breaks. He called me grounded, said I had an old soul, and somehow that made me feel seen. Tyler didn't own the house he lived in. It belonged to his parents, Janice and Robert Morgan, who'd bought it back in the 80s when golden. Colorado still felt like a secret. A little wooden cabin tucked on the hillside. Quiet, remote, charming, if you didn't mind the squeaky floorboards. I moved in after dating him for 8 months. It wasn't official. There wasn't some huge conversation or formal agreement. I just started staying longer. Then I brought my books, then my clothes. And one day I realized half the kitchen was mine. But to his parents, I was just the girl who's visiting. At first, I didn't mind. Tyler said they were private, that they didn't warm up to people easily. So I stayed polite. I offered to help with repairs. I brought Janice a pie once she said she was watching her sugar. I complimented her rose bushes. She said they were naturally resilient, unlike most people. It stung, but I told myself it wasn't personal. Tyler made up for it. I thought he'd pull me into his lap when we watched movies. He'd send sweet texts on long days. He'd kiss the back of my neck and call me his piece. But slowly, the affection shifted. He stopped calling me his piece, started calling me needy. He'd roll his eyes if I asked about groceries, leave early without saying goodbye, tell people I just worked at a library, as if I shelved books instead of managing archival collections and overseeing 3 departments. But the worst part was the way he made me feel invisible inside a home I gave so much of myself to. I still remember one dinner with his parents. We'd been dating for over a year. I cooked everything: lasagna, garlic bread, salad. Janice sat down and asked, "So, when are you heading back to your place?" My place. I'd been living there for 7 months. Tyler just laughed and said, "Yeah, she kind of just moved in, huh?" Kind of like I was a misplaced sock. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them how many nights I stayed up washing their dishes, or how I fixed the leaky faucet when no one else cared, but I just smiled, said nothing, and cleared the plates. I think part of me believed that if I stayed kind, they'd eventually see my worth. But kindness in the wrong place becomes currency for disrespect. And that currency, it gets spent fast, especially when no one's keeping receipts. I noticed things were changing when Tyler started locking his phone, started getting weird about work. He said he needed space to think, that I was always around. But I was still paying the electricity bill, still walking the dog, still buying groceries every week. One evening, I came home to find all my books packed into boxes. No note, no explanation, just cardboard taped shut with my handwriting labeled over them. I asked him, "What is this?" He said, "Just making space. Don't overthink it," and walked away. I stood there staring at the life I'd quietly built, being dismantled like it was clutter. Like I was clutter. That night, I sat in the car for an hour. Didn't drive, didn't cry. I just thought about who I was becoming, about the girl who let herself be erased. And something in me cracked. Not loudly. Just enough to start seeing clearly. That house wasn't mine. That man wasn't mine. That life, it didn't even like me. So I made a decision, not out of rage, but out of mercy for the version of myself that kept shrinking. I would leave, silently, without asking permission, without needing closure, because I already knew they'd never give it. The night I left, the sky was purple. Not black, not blue. but a deep, bruised violet like the kind of color you only see when something is ending. I packed in silence, not because I was scared, but because noise would have made it real. And I wasn't ready for real. I was ready for distance, for space, for breath. I didn't take much, just the essentials. A suitcase of clothes, 2 boxes of books, my grandmother's tea kettle. The rest, let it rot. Because when you've been treated like a ghost, you start learning how to vanish. I stayed in a short-term rental on the edge of Boulder. Cheap, cold, but it had a lock no one else had the code to. And that felt like wealth. I didn't tell anyone where I went. Not my friends, not my coworkers, not even my sister. Tyler didn't call. He didn't text. Didn't ask if I made it home safe. I think that was the part that killed something in me. Because when someone doesn't chase you, you finally understand how far gone they were, long before you ever left. So I sat alone for a long while, until one night, I remembered a conversation I'd had with his father. It was during tax season. Robert had been grumbling at the kitchen table, flipping through papers, swearing under his breath. I told Janice we can't afford another refinance, he muttered, but she won't listen. Thinks we'll win the lottery or something. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if the house wasn't fully theirs? What if they were just like me, barely holding on? I stayed up all night digging county records, mortgage documents, property tax liens. And then I found it. Golden County Property, 3387B. Primary owners Janice and Robert Morgan. Current status and delinquent. 4 missed mortgage payments. Bank had started pre-foreclosure filing 6 weeks prior. I stared at the screen for a long, long time. Because this was no longer about heartbreak. This was about power. And I had a chance to take it back. I called a contact from college, Rita Chen. She'd interned with a local real estate group that specialized in distressed properties. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I told her I wanted to make a cash offer on a house that hadn't hit public auction yet, she didn't hesitate. I know exactly who to talk to, she said. I asked her to keep my name out of it. Use my LLC. No direct links. No emotional fingerprints. She agreed. Within 48 hours, we had preliminary access to the bank holding the note. 7 days later, I submitted an all-cash offer just over the balance owed, but enough to make the bank happy. No inspection, no contingencies. The house wasn't even officially listed yet, but I didn't care. I wasn't buying a house. I was buying the silence I'd been denied. Rita called me 2 weeks later. They accepted, just like that. It was done. I owned the mortgage. I owned the house. I owned the very structure where I had once scrubbed floors, folded towels, watered plants, and been made to feel like a burden. I drove out there the next morning, didn't get out of the car. Just sat across the street, windows up, engine off, watched as Janice came outside in her floral robe, coffee in hand, yelling at the dog. Robert followed, clutching a newspaper like it was a lifeline. And Tyler, still inside, I assumed, still sleeping in the bed we used to share, still unaware. I didn't feel giddy, didn't feel cruel. What I felt was finally even. They took my dignity quietly, and I just took their deed. It's funny how fast power changes hands. One moment, you're being kicked out without a single word of thanks. The next, you hold the keys. I didn't serve them eviction papers right away. That wasn't the point. I wanted them to feel it. The shift, the unease, the knowing that something had changed, but not being able to name what. So I waited. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Then, on the first day of spring, I mailed them the notice. Certified letter? No return address. The envelope was crisp. Inside a formal ownership statement, lease terms, and a polite but firm request. They could either pay rent at 2x the market rate or vacate within 30 days. No negotiation. No extensions. I made sure the letterhead read, Wade Property Holdings, LLC. Let them sit with that. Let them taste my name. Let it echo in that house every time they opened a drawer I once filled. They called Rita, panicked. Demanded to know who I was. She told them it was confidential. Said the client wanted to remain anonymous. Janice threatened legal action, but they had no case. Because I didn't scam them. I didn't trick them. I didn't break in. I bought what they failed to protect. That's the thing about entitlement. It rots the moment someone else plays the game better. I drove by again on a Thursday. Tyler was out front, alone. He looked thinner, older, like someone who finally learned what loss felt like. He glanced at my car, paused, tilted his head, but didn't recognize me. And that was my final freedom. To be unseen again, but this time on my terms. That night, I opened a bottle of wine. Alone. Not to celebrate, but to mark the shift. There's a kind of peace that comes not when you win, but when you stop explaining why you deserve to. I toasted to silence. To every night I ate dinner alone while they talked over me. To every time I bit my tongue when Janice made a passive comment about my humble upbringing. To every glance Tyler gave me like I was a placeholder. They never thought I'd leave. And they certainly never thought I'd come back, owning the roof above their heads. The eviction countdown started ticking. Week 1, they tried ignoring it. Week 2, Janice listed the house on Airbnb like she still had control. Week 3, Tyler finally messaged me. He figured it out. Or maybe he got tired of pretending he didn't know who Wade Holdings belonged to. Was this your plan all along, he wrote. I didn't respond. Because no, it wasn't. I didn't plan this. But life hands you weapons when you stop begging for peace. And I learned, sometimes the sharpest revenge comes gift-wrapped in paperwork. They moved out on day 29. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't leave a note. Just left the porch light on. And I turned it off. Then changed the locks. Not out of pettiness, but because the house had finally come clean. Like me, the house was empty. Not quiet empty. Quiet can feel peaceful, but this felt like a vacuum, like someone had pressed mute on a memory. I walked through each room slowly, alone. The furniture was gone. The air smelled like dust and leftover resentment. There were still faint marks on the floor where their dining table had once stood. A ring on the window ledge where Janice's fern used to sit. The bedroom bare. No sheets, no photos, not even a hanger in the closet. But what struck me most was the bathroom. Tyler had left the mirror fogged, as if he'd showered, stared at himself, and walked out without looking back. That was fine. I wasn't here for closure. I was here for clarity. And clarity doesn't need noise. I had the locks changed that day. Paid extra for the reinforced bolts and digital keypad. I hired a local cleaner. Told her I didn't want anything fancy, just a reset. A purge. She asked if I was moving in. I told her no. I'm not staying. I said, I'm just reclaiming the air. She smiled like she understood. Maybe she did. I spent the next week fixing small things. Not because I had to, but because it reminded me of who I was. The kind of woman who changes her own light bulbs, who caulks her own windows, who paints over the past in 2 coats of matte white. But even with the walls refreshed, I didn't feel at home, because I didn't want to live in a place that once asked me to shrink. I wanted it clean for the next person. Someone who wouldn't be made to feel invisible. So I listed the house. Quietly. No big announcements. No social media posts. Just one crisp listing with polished photos and a single sentence in the description. Lovingly restored cabin, perfect for a fresh start. It sold within a week. To a young couple, Kayla and Zoe, first-time homeowners with big dreams, and a golden retriever named Louie. They cried when I handed them the keys. Zoe hugged me and whispered, "We thought we'd never find a place that felt like ours." I just smiled. Didn't tell them a word about the house's history. Because this wasn't a story about bitterness. It was a story about reclamation. And I had one more chapter left. You see, Tyler didn't know about the sale. He thought I'd kept the house. Thought I'd be living in it. Thought I was still haunted. So when I saw him 2 weeks later at a coffee shop downtown, I decided to confirm the truth. He didn't see me at first. He was on his laptop, headphones in, looking tired in that way people do when they've been knocked off their own pedestal. I walked up, slow and silent, sat down across from him. His eyes widened. He fumbled for words. "Emily, I didn't know you'd be here." I didn't answer, just sipped my coffee and waited. He stared at me like I was someone he used to know but wasn't sure how. Finally, he asked, "So, are you living there now?" I shook my head. No, I sold it. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. "But why after all that?" I leaned forward, voice steady. "Because, Tyler, I was never trying to take your home." Pause. I was trying to take myself back. He didn't respond. Didn't have to, because the silence between us said everything. The apology he never gave. The thank you he withheld. The history he rewrote in his favor. I stood up, tossed the rest of my drink, and before I walked out, I turned to him once more. "I hope you build something real next time." And then I left. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just freely, like someone who no longer needed to prove she'd been wronged. Because the truth had already spoken in deeds, not words. In signatures, in contracts, in the quiet way a deed transfer can echo louder than any scream. A month passed. Then, too, life moved forward. I took on a new role at the university, curating a special archive on women's voices in American history. The irony didn't escape me. For so long, I had swallowed mine. Now, I preserve others. One afternoon, Kayla sent me a photo of their porch. String lights, Louis asleep on a blanket, a caption that read, "It finally feels like home." I stared at it longer than I meant to, not out of sadness, but pride that I could be part of someone's beginning. By finally ending what I should have never tolerated. People think revenge is loud, explosive, but the best kind is quiet, measured, legal, clean. It leaves no ashes, just proof that you were never the problem. You were just never meant to stay small. That night, I went home and sat on my porch with a notebook, not to write about him, but to write to the version of myself who stayed too long. The girl who laughed politely when she was dismissed. The one who paid the water bill and then was told she didn't contribute. The woman who waited for someone else to validate her presence inside a house she helped keep warm. I wrote to her like a sister, told her I was sorry, told her she deserved more. That she wasn't weak, just conditioned to believe love required her silence. And as the stars came out, I let the pen move freely, not for revenge, but for resurrection. The next morning, I mailed a check, not to Tyler, not to Janice or Robert, but to a shelter in Golden that helps women transition from abusive homes. I marked it as anonymous. No need for recognition, just restoration. I thought about how many women lose their voices inside someone else's narrative. Told to be grateful for crumbs, told they're too much for asking for a seat at the table they set, and I realized my story wasn't rare. But my ending was, because I stayed kind, but I stopped being available. I remained silent, but never powerless. And that was the difference. That was the line. One side is survival, the other sovereignty. So if you ask me what I got from all of this, I'll tell you. A deed with my name on it. A clean break. A full exhale. And the unshakable truth that I never needed permission to reclaim what was mine. I never thought I'd return to Golden. Not really. Not after everything. But life has a strange way of circling back when you've made peace with the past. It wasn't revenge that brought me back. It was a letter. A handwritten envelope slipped into my work mailbox at the university. No return address, just my name. Inside, a folded sheet of lined paper. No greeting, no signature, just 10 words written in a messy, almost desperate scrawl. I think I finally understand. I'm sorry I failed you. I read it 3 times, then once more, out loud. It didn't say who it was from, but it didn't have to. There are some apologies only one voice can write. I sat with that letter for days. Not because I needed validation, but because I didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't an invitation. Wasn't even an opening. Just a crack in a wall that had been sealed shut. And maybe that's all it was ever meant to be. But it did something to me. It made me wonder what remains when everything else has been stripped away. Not just from Tyler, but from myself. Because healing isn't linear. It loops, spirals, echoes. It surprises you on calm mornings, in grocery store aisles, or while reading a line of poetry that used to mean nothing, and now means everything. One Saturday, I found myself driving, not with intention, just with movement, and somehow, my car knew the way. I passed the street where the house once stood. Kayla and Zoe had painted the porch a cheerful blue. The mailbox had stickers now. Louis's name in paw prints, it didn't feel like mine, and that was a comfort. Because the best revenge stories, they don't end with fireworks. They end with freedom. I kept driving until I reached the river trail. The one Tyler and I used to walk when things were still good. I parked, got out, walked. The trees were taller now, the stream thinner. But the bend in the path where he once carved our initials into a bench was still there. And so was the bench. The carving had faded. Moss had crept in. Time had done what time always does, soften the sharpest edges. I sat, breathed, felt the wind wrap around me like a question. What do you do when you've won quietly? When no one clapped? When there was no applause, no audience, no grand finale? You sit, you honor the silence, and you write the final chapter for yourself. Because Tyler's apology wasn't foreclosure. It was a mirror. And what I saw in that mirror was someone who no longer flinched when remembered. I'd become a woman who didn't just survive loss. she turned it into leverage. And then into legacy, I stayed on that bench for an hour, let myself cry for the girl I used to be, not out of sorrow. But reverence? She deserved to be mourned. She also deserved to be thanked. Because she carried me here, I drove home with the windows down. No music, just the sound of the road. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Some houses aren't meant to be lived in. They're meant to be walked through, so you can remember what not to build." I lit a candle, burned the letter, watched the ash rise, curl, and settle. That was my ceremony. That was my peace. A few weeks later, I gave a talk at a conference in Denver. The theme was invisible labor and the emotional cost of survival. I stood on stage, heart steady, told a room full of women that invisibility is not a flaw, it's a weapon. When sharpened, when claimed, when transformed, I told them about the girl who cooked, cleaned, gave, and disappeared. And then I told them how she came back. Not to scream, but to sign papers, to reclaim property, to gift the keys to someone else, to write her own name in bold on contracts that mattered. And the room didn't erupt, it held its breath. Because some truths don't need to be loud. They just need to be spoken. After the talk, a woman approached me. Mid-40s, clear eyes, worn hands. She said, "I left yesterday." I nodded. She didn't say from where. She didn't need to. I reached into my bag, handed her a folded note I'd written months ago, for someone I hadn't met yet. Inside, it said, "You are not too late. You are just in time to begin," she cried. I held her, and in that moment, I knew this was the real win. Not the deed, not the locks, not even the power shift, but the echo, the way one silent comeback could spark another, the way stories heal in the telling. And I thought maybe that's why I went through all of it. Not just for myself, but for whoever came next. A few days later, I received another letter. Not from Tyler, from Zoe. It came with a photo of their living room's soft yellow walls, 2 mugs of cocoa on a windowsill, and Louis sprawled like royalty on the rug. Underneath, she'd written, "This house feels sacred. Thank you for giving us a clean slate." And something inside me swelled not pride, but gratitude, because I hadn't just rewritten my ending, I'd rewritten the beginning for someone else. It made me think about legacy, not the kind carved in stone, but the kind whispered in small moments between women who see each other, who pass the torch quietly, who rebuild, not because someone told them to, but because they remembered they could. I framed the photo, set it on my bookshelf, next to a stack of poetry, right beneath the copy of Adrienne Rich's Dream of a Common Language. It felt right. Because all of this, every silent victory, every signed deed, every steady breath in the face of dismissal was its own language. And finally, I was fluent. There's a myth that says revenge is about destruction. But for me, it was about construction. I didn't tear their world down. I built mine, brick by brick, word by word, action by action, until I stood on solid ground alone, but never lonely. Because strength like that echoes. And now, whenever I meet a woman who thinks she has nothing left, I tell her to check again. Her voice, her name, her story, they're still there, waiting. And this time, no one else gets to hold the pen. I always thought the last chapter would be about triumph, about standing on a metaphorical mountain, wind in my hair, the world below me finally seeing who I am. But the truth is, real endings are quiet. No fireworks. No final confrontation. No applause. Just the calm knowing that you didn't lose yourself to win. It's been a year. Since the letter, since the sale, since I last saw his face. I no longer flinch when I hear his name. No longer measure my worth by how little space I take up in someone else's life. I've grown into my full shape. And the woman I am now, she doesn't shrink. She doesn't beg. She doesn't apologize for taking up room. Some nights, I walk through my apartment and touch every object with intention. The kettle, the chair by the window, the stack of books with folded corners. I bought every piece. No one handed this to me, and that makes the air sweeter. Freedom is quiet like that. It doesn't knock. It just fills every corner, until you forget you were ever gasping. A few months ago, I got a call from the university dean. He said they were creating a new initiative, an archive dedicated to women who shaped silent revolutions. He asked if I'd lead it. I said yes, not because I needed the title, but because I knew there were stories out there, like mine, waiting to be held. Stories that didn't scream, but carved, etched, held the weight of generations. I began collecting them: letters, journals, court transcripts, even handwritten recipes passed down by women who held families together with one hand and built dreams with the other. And every time I opened a box or cataloged a name, I whispered a thank you to them and to myself. One day, while sorting through donations, I found a photo tucked in the back of a book, a black and white image of two women in overalls, standing beside a tractor. On the back, it said, "Built it ourselves, 1949. I held that photo to my chest because somehow they knew the future would try to forget them. So they left proof, and now so have I. My story is documented, my name recorded, not because it's dramatic, but because it's real, because someday, another girl might find herself sitting in the passenger seat of someone else's life and wonder if she's the crazy one. And maybe, just maybe, she'll read about me. And no, she isn't. She's just in the preface. And her plot twist is coming. This is not a revenge story. Not really. It's a story of reclamation, of choosing not to yell because you found a better use for your voice, of leaving not to make someone miss you, but to find the parts of yourself you abandoned trying to be enough, of returning not to reopen wounds, but to close the door behind you for good. And yes, of buying the house, but more than that, of knowing you didn't have to live in it to prove you'd won. Sometimes power looks like property. Sometimes it looks like paper. But the greatest power looks like peace. Peace when you sleep alone. Peace when no one claps. Peace when you're no longer haunted by rooms you once tiptoed through. I don't tell many people this part, but the day I sold the house, I left something in the cabinet above the stove. A letter, folded, sealed, unsigned. It read, "If you ever feel small in a space you helped build, leave. And if you can't buy the damn house, it's probably still there. Maybe Kayla or Zoe found it. Maybe not. But I like to think, someday, someone will, and they'll know they're not alone. They'll know silence doesn't mean surrender. They'll know that power, real power, doesn't need a spotlight. It needs a spine, a signature, and the will to walk away with your name intact. That's how it ends. Not with noise, but with a key, turning in a door you no longer need to open. Because your story lives elsewhere now. In your hands, on your terms. And this time, you're the one holding the pen. Since then, I've learned to love the sound of my own footsteps. Not the hurried ones, the ones that tiptoe around someone else's mood. But the steady ones? The ones that echo when you walk away on your own terms. I travel more now. Took myself to New Mexico in the spring. Watched the desert bloom. Sat in silence for hours and let the wind speak in a language only my healed parts understood. No itinerary. No one to impress. Just me and the version of myself I'd nearly buried. She's louder now. Not in volume, but in presence. She enters rooms like she deserves to be there. Because she does. And when people ask what happened, why I left, what I did, I tell them this. I didn't just leave a man. I left a version of myself who thought survival was love. And I built something better. People always want the drama. They want the fight, the downfall, the courtroom, the tears. But real power isn't about scenes. It's about structure. It's built in bank transfers, property rights, LLCs, boundary setting, and refusal. Refusal to be erased. Refusal to keep explaining. Refusal to shrink for the comfort of those who'll never grow. One afternoon, while teaching a workshop, a young student raised her hand and asked, "How do you know you're done?" I smiled, because I used to ask the same question. And I told her, "You're done when peace doesn't feel like a reward anymore, but a standard." She wrote it down, and I realized so had I. Every step, every choice, every heartbreak, every twist had brought me here. To the version of me that no longer needs permission. Who knows that quiet doesn't mean weakness? It means clarity. So this is where my story ends. Not because I'm finished, but because I'm full. And if someone somewhere ever finds themselves in the middle of the same storm, may they remember me? Not for what I bought, but for what I reclaimed. My voice, my space, myself. And may they know without question that they can too.